Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm really excited to finally share this video with you after finding the motivation to edit it over the past month. While the story in this video stays true to its essence and reality, it's been toned down to comply with YouTube rules and ethical standards. Still, it might contain some disturbing content for certain viewers. Now that we've got that disclaimer out of the way, I just want to mention that English isn't my first language, so forgive me if I slip up on some sentences. Alright, let's get into this spine-chilling tale. It was 1874. Blanche Monnier, 25 years old and living in Poitiers, was a young lady of French society at the height of her beauty. According to the principles of nobility, they belonged to the high nobility because of their ancient origins. Her mother, Madame Monnier, was conscious of being noble. She was closely involved in charity work in order to be described as good-natured and tolerant. No one could have known that the same woman had a very strict and conservative side to her family. She dreamed of marrying off her daughter to a man from the bourgeois class. Blanche, on the other hand, was not interested in any of the men who surrounded her. She was in love with an older lawyer. She had no problem marrying this man who was, in her mother's words, broke. When Madame found out, she forbade her to see the lawyer. But Blanche was not tolerant enough to agree to this. Instead of taking care of her suitors from Parisian society, she was looking for ways to meet the man she loved. Far from softening her mother, her insistence provoked her. After Madame Monnier began to see her daughter as a nuisance for breaking her promises, she felt she had only one option left: lock her up. With the help of her son Marcel, she locked her daughter Blanche in a room in the attic of the mansion. The poor girl was held against her will in a dark, isolated room by her own brother and mother. At first, she held on to the hope that maybe they would take pity on her, or that someone would come looking for her in a few days. Unfortunately, this was never true. Blanche, who was not even allowed to go to the toilet for fear of escape, had no choice but to defecate where she was. Years of struggle had left her velvet skin looking like sandpaper. Her waist-length silk hair was in knots. No matter how much she shouted, no one could hear her voice. She was breathing, unaware of the death of the man she loved. Hers was not life. She was like a dead body they had forgotten to bury. If it hadn't been for the mysterious letter she received in May 1901 from the Attorney General of Paris, she would have died physically as well as mentally. The unsigned letter read, "Mr. Attorney General, I am writing to inform you of an extremely serious case. I want to tell you about a girl who has been locked up in Madame Monnier's house, half-starved, and who has spent the last 25 years literally in a stinking garbage dump." The disturbing nature of the allegations continued from the first to the last line of the letter. It was difficult for the Attorney General to digest what he read. Instead of wasting time investigating who sent it, he launched a small-scale investigation into the Monnier family. The untarnished reputation of the elderly Madame Monnier, the darling of Parisian society, and that of her son. Any wrongdoing would probably ruin his career. Despite knowing this, he gave the necessary instructions for the police to raid the mansion. In the first phase of the house search, the house was clean as expected, but when they went upstairs, they were met with a horrible odor that made the tip of their noses ache. The smell led to the discovery of a door protected by a padlock. When they removed the lock and opened it, the cause of the odor emanating from inside was revealed. The floor was littered with piles of feces and vomit. A woman lay emaciated on a rotting straw mattress and looked at the police with fearful eyes. After she was hospitalized, news spread that Madame Monnier had been arrested for imprisoning her own daughter for years. This brought the old woman face to face with angry rudeness. Her heart couldn't take the hate speech any longer. After a few days of fighting for her life, she died in hospital from a heart attack. Her death without paying for what she had done further inflamed public anger. Naturally, all eyes turned to Blanche's brother. On the surface, Marcel Monnier was making the best of his life as a lawyer. It was easy for him to defend himself against the accusations. In a few days, he resumed his free life. But his sister had become an empty shell because of him and his mother. She was in a position to marvel at the light of day. It was impossible for her to remain the same physically and mentally after exactly 25 years. He had obvious problems such as coprophilia, sexual pleasure in feces, exhibitionism, and schizophrenia. The next part of his life was spent in a psychiatric hospital. Her freedom lasted from the day she was born until she was 25. She was never the old Blanche Monnier. She knew that her youth, beauty, and joy had been stolen. In 1913, at the age of 64, she died in a psychiatric ward. It was never revealed who sent the letter. According to speculation, it was the rationalization of Marc Monnier, who was worried that all the blame for Madame Monnier's death would fall on him. Marcel was aware that if his sister was found, she would be accused of abuse. I'd like to interject for a moment. I really put effort into my channel. If you'd like to see more videos like this, I'd appreciate it if you could subscribe to my channel and give my video a thumbs up. So far, our story seems to be complete, but there is one more allegation swirling around. In the Blanche Monnier case, 2 different allegations are known. It would be unfair to share the first one and not share the second one. Let's take a look at the other allegation. In every respect, Louise Monnier was a difficult woman to live with. She was nervous, very nervous, stingy, and had poor personal hygiene. During Marcel's trial, one maid testified that Madame Monnier wore the same dirty dress every day, and another said that her children complained that she ate too much. To be clear, the family's situation was comfortable. They had a large townhouse in Poitiers, a house in the countryside, and many other rented properties. Madame Monnier could put pressure on both her husband and her son, but Blanche was different. She was more rebellious, defying her mother's rules. The two clashed often, and the arguments became more frequent as Blanche grew into a young woman. Blanche Monnier is said to have had a happy childhood despite the difficulties caused by family dynamics. As she grew older, she became more interested in religion. She studied at the Christian Union for a while, and wanted to become a nun. It was during this period that Blanche began to have mystical experiences that made her crave solitude, spending more and more time in her bedroom. Perhaps initially she refused to eat as a religious fast, but this became more serious until she developed anorexia. In 1872, at the age of 23, Blanche caught a fever and went to bed. Although the illness eventually passed, from that point on she never returned to the world. It was clear that Blanche was now suffering from serious mental health problems. She refused to wear clothes inside the house and stood naked in her bedroom window, visible from the street. Fearing this exhibitionism, her family had Blanche's bedroom window closed, so the police found her in a dark, prison-like room. Until her discovery in 1901, the Blanche family had 3 family doctors. Of these, Dr. Guérinot was the first to diagnose Blanche when she fell ill as a young woman. After his death in 1882, Dr. Chedevergne took over as family physician. In his testimony to the court, he claimed to have last seen Blanche in 1896, when she was 47 years old. This is the last time Blanche was examined by a doctor because in 1897, a third doctor, Dr. Chiron, became Blanche's mother's doctor because her mother was frequently ill due to old age. He had no idea that Madame Monnier had a daughter, let alone that he had never seen Blanche. In the doctor's opinion, as told by family and staff, Blanche was incurably insane. Faced with this diagnosis, the Monniers decided not to send Blanche to a hospital or mental institution. We can only guess why they made this decision. Perhaps they kept her at home for fear of the stigma attached to mental illness. Or perhaps they believed that she would be better cared for at home. Asylums did not have a good reputation in the 19th century.
You'll find most of our patients are here because they are embarrassments to their families, outcasts.
We also have interesting information about Blanche Monnier's brother. While some people who knew the Monnier family spoke favorably of Marcel's intelligence and high moral standing, others portrayed him as weak-willed, naive, and stupid. His inability or unwillingness to stand up to his mother was evident in his own and others' testimonies. Even more bizarre was the claim that she was a coprophiliac. She said that her former housekeeper Marcel used a bedpan instead of a toilet, and that he once carried a full bedpan into the living room where his wife and daughter were sitting, and closed the windows and doors so that they could better appreciate the smell. Presumably, this statement was considered relevant because it showed Blanche's unusual attitude to the feces that covered her. It should be noted again that Blanche herself had been diagnosed with coprophilia. Marcel's trial for complicity in a crime of violence began on October 7, 1901, and lasted 5 days. Several people who had worked for years in the Monnier family home testified at the trial. They were asked about Blanche's condition, the cleanliness of her room, and her ability to move around the house. Her testimony painted a very different picture from what was reported in the press and on the street. First of all, Blanche's existence was no secret. Everyone who worked for the Monniers knew that Blanche was there and that she was ill. Second, she was not locked in her room during her quarantine. She was able to visit other parts of the house and continued to play the piano for a while. Third, many people swore that during the 20 years that Marie Fazy cared for Blanche, She bathed, and her room was clean. These statements must be understood in the context of Blanche being a very sick woman who soiled herself, tore her clothes, and damaged objects and furniture in her violent rages. The court heard from a carpenter who came to the house several times over the years to repair items in Blanche's room, including the door. Blanche would not have been an easy patient to care for, so when her chief caregiver died 5 years ago before things took a turn for the worse. The problem was that Blanche's mother, Louise Monnier, seemed to have washed her hands of her daughter at this point. Her husband had died more than 14 years earlier, and Blanche's last hope of having someone who could act in her best interests had died with him. Instead of replacing Marie Fazy with another nurse, Louise used a series of untrained young women servants who were completely incapable of meeting the needs of a very sick woman. They were also expected to sleep in Blanche's bedroom, an unattractive prospect, and many of them soon left. Louise Monnier made the situation worse with her stingy behavior. A maid told how she asked for clean nightgowns and sheets from the linen cupboard for Blanche, who was sometimes incontinent but was refused. Louise said Blanche would only tear them or soil them again. With her mother's refusal to hire suitable caretakers or provide for her daughter's needs, it is not surprising that Blanche was left in a deplorable situation. Blanche's situation worsened in 1899 when Louise appointed 2 new servants, Juliette Dupuis and Eugénie Tabot, to care for Blanche. Once again, they were young and inexperienced and found it difficult to persuade their patients to cooperate. Blanche's mother was not actively involved in her care. It is unclear at this point whether she even visited her daughter. When her brother Marcel was asked if Blanche's room was clean, his answer was contradictory. He claimed that the situation was in an acceptable state when he told her that he had petitioned her mother to hospitalize her, but her mother denied this each time. Marcel did not have the power or the legal standing to evict Blanche. In fact, he was waiting for his mother to die before he acted. Louise's deteriorating health was the catalyst for Blanche's eventual discovery. 6 weeks before the police intervention, Louise was too ill to give orders to her staff, and Marcel was too scared to take on the role alone. Whether through ignorance or laziness, Blanche was not given the attention she needed. She lay on a filthy straw mattress, covered in her own waste, rotten food and vermin. Seeing her in this terrible state finally forced someone to take action. It is still unclear who that someone was, but it was probably one of the new servants who told her soldier boyfriend about Blanche, and he wrote the anonymous letter alerting the authorities. So that's the end of our video. What do you think about this tragic event? Don't forget to leave your opinion below. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.